Promises made, promises kept. It's time to hear the truth about our President, Donald J. Trump, and his many accomplishments. This is why we support President Donald J. Trump. Who are we? We're the United States citizens who are voting for our president in November 3rd. By voting for him, it will save America from the communists, the socialists, and the Marxists who are set out to destroy our country. And they want to destroy you, your children, and your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren. Fact check it. Our president has been in office for almost 4 years. And you may ask, and many have asked, well, what has he done? What has he done other than dodging the darts from the fake news media, constant attacks daily from Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, Schumer, Schiff, Comey, all the inquiry to the Russian collusion, only to find out that it was a fake dossier? And spend millions of tax dollars we spent for all of this blame against our president, only to find out that it's all were lies. All of them were lies. Our president never engaged in conspiracy or anything against America. All of that was a undermining plot and scheme to have a silent coup to take our president out of office, a duly elected president. So what has our president done and his cabinet accomplished? Well, here you go. We're going to begin. President Trump recently signed 3 bills to benefit Native people. One gives compensation to the Spokane tribe for loss of their lands in the mid-1900s. One funds the native language programs, and the third gives federal recognition to the Little Shell tribe of Chippewa Indians in Montana. President Trump finalized the creation of Space Force as our 6th military branch. No other president has ever done that. President Trump signed a law to make cruelty to animals a federal felony so that animal abusers face tougher consequences. Violent crime fell every year as our president was in office, after rising during the 2 years before he was elected. And this was before COVID-19, this terrible, horrible pandemic that hit our country. President Trump's EPA gave $100 million to fix the water infrastructure problem in Flint, Michigan. Under President Trump's leadership, in 2018, the United States surpassed Russia and Saudi Arabia to become the world's largest producer of crude oil, no longer dependent on foreign oil. President Trump signed a law ending the gag orders on pharmacists that prevented them from sharing money-saving information. President Trump signed the Allow States and Victims to Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act, called FOSTA, which includes the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act, SESTA, which both give law enforcement and victims new tools to fight sex trafficking. President Trump signed a bill to require airports to provide spaces for breastfeeding moms. The 25% lowest paid Americans enjoyed a 4.5% income boost in November 2019, which outpaces a 2.9% gain in earnings for the country's highest paid workers. Low-wage workers are benefiting from higher minimum wages and from corporations that are increasing entry-level pay. President Trump signed the biggest wilderness protection and conservation bill in a decade and designated 375,000 acres as protected land. President Trump signed the Save Our Seas Act, which funds $10 million per year to clean tons of plastic and garbage from the ocean. President Trump signed a bill this year allowing some drug imports from Canada so that prescription prices would go down in the United States. President Trump signed an executive order this year that forces all healthcare providers to disclose the cost of their services so that Americans can comparison shop and know how much less providers charge insurance companies. When signing that bill, he said no American should be blindsided by bills for medical service they never agreed to in advance. Hospitals will now be required to post their standard charges for services, including the discounted price a hospital is willing to accept. In the 8 years prior to President Trump's inauguration, prescription drug prices increased by an average of 3.6% per year. But under President Trump, drug prices have seen year-over-year declines in 9 of the last 10 months, with a 1.1% drop as of the most recent month. He created a White House VA hotline to help veterans and principally staffed it with veterans and direct family members of veterans. The VA employees are being held accountable for poor performance, with more than 4,000 VA employees removed, demoted, and suspended so far. President Trump issued an executive order requiring the Secretaries of Defense, Homeland Security, and Veterans Affairs to submit a joint plan to provide veterans access to mental health treatment as a transition to civilian life. Because of a bill signed and championed by President Trump, in 2020 most federal employees will see their pay increase by an average of 3.1%, the largest raise in more than 10 years. President Trump signed into a law up to 12 weeks of paid parental leave for millions of federal workers. President Trump administration will provide HIV prevention drugs for free to 200,000 uninsured patients per year for 11 years. All-time record sales during the 2019 holidays. President Trump signed an order allowing small businesses to group together when buying insurance to get a better price. President Trump signed the Preventing Maternal Deaths Act that provides funding for states to develop maternal mortality reviews to better understand maternal complications and identify solutions, and largely focuses on reducing the higher mortality rates for Black Americans. In 2018, President Trump signed the groundbreaking First Step Act, a criminal justice bill which enacted reforms that make our justice system fairer and help former inmates successfully return to society. The First Step Act's reforms addressed inequities in sentencing laws that disproportionately harmed Black Americans and reformed mandatory minimums that created unfair outcomes. The First Step Act expanded judicial discretion in sentencing of nonviolent crimes. Over 90% of those benefiting from the retroactive sentencing reductions in the First Step Act are Black Americans. The First Step Act provides rehabilitative programs to inmates, helping them successfully rejoin society and not return to crime. President Trump increased funding for historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, by more than 14%. President Trump signed legislation forgiving Hurricane Katrina debt that threatened HBCUs. New single-family home sales are up 31.6% in October 2019 compared to just 1 year ago. Made HBCUs a priority by creating the position of Executive Director of the White House Initiatives on HBCUs. President Trump received the Bipartisan Justice Award at a historically Black college for his criminal justice reform accomplishments. The poverty rate fell to a 17-year low of 11.8% under the Trump administration as a result of a job-rich environment. Poverty rates for African Americans and Hispanic Americans have reached their lowest levels since the U.S. began collecting such data. President Trump signed a bill that creates 5 national monuments, expands several national parks, adds 1.3 million acres of wilderness, and permanently reauthorizes the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Trump's USDA committed $124 million to rebuild rural water infrastructure. Consumer confidence and small business confidence is at an all-time high. More than 7 million jobs, that's right, 7 million jobs created since election. More Americans are now employed than ever recorded before in our history. More than 400,000 manufacturing jobs created since he took office. Through Trump's Anti-Trafficking Coordination Team, or ACT Team initiative, federal law enforcement more than doubled convictions of human trafficking and increased the number of defendants charged by 75% in ACT Team districts. In 2018, the Department of Justice dismantled an organization that was the Internet's leading source of prostitution, related advertisements resulting in sex trafficking. President Trump's OMB published new anti-trafficking guidance for government procurement officials to more effectively combat human trafficking. President Trump's Immigration and Customs Enforcement's Homeland Security investigations arrested 1,588 criminals associated with human trafficking. President Trump's Department of Health and Human Services provided funding to support the National Human Trafficking Hotline to identify perpetrators and give victims the help that they need. The hotline identified 16,862 potential human trafficking cases. President Trump's DOJ provided grants to organizations that support human trafficking victims, serving nearly 9,000 cases from July 1, 2017 to June 30, 2018. The Department of Homeland Security has hired more victim assistance specialists helping victims get resources and support. President Trump has called on Congress to pass school choice legislation so that no child is trapped in a failing school because of his or her zip code. The president signed funding legislation in September 2018 that increased funding for school choice by $42 million. The tax cuts signed into law by President Trump promote school choice by allowing families to use 529 college saving plans for elementary and secondary education. Under his leadership, ISIS has lost most of their territory and been largely dismantled. ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was killed. President Trump signed the first Perkins CTE reauthorization since 2006, authorizing more than $1 billion for states each year to fund vocational and career education programs. Executive order expanding apprenticeship opportunities for students and workers. Trump issued an executive order prohibiting the U.S. government from discriminating against Christians or punishing expressions of faith. President Trump signed an executive order that allows the government to withhold money from college campuses deemed to be anti-Semitic and who fail to combat anti-Semitism. President Trump ordered a halt to U.S. tax money going to international organizations that fund or perform abortions. President Trump imposed sanctions on the socialists in Venezuela who have killed their citizens. President Trump finalized new trade agreement with South Korea. He made a deal with the European Union to increase U.S. energy exports to Europe. He withdrew the U.S. from the job-killing TPP deal. President Trump secured $250 billion in new trade and investment deals in China and $12 billion in Vietnam. He okayed up to $12 billion in aid for farmers affected by unfair trade retaliation. We're still winning. President Trump has had over a dozen U.S. hostages freed, including those Obama could not ever get freed. President Trump signed the Music Modernization Act, the biggest change to copyright law in decades. President Trump secured billions of dollars that would fund the building of a wall at our southern border. The Trump administration is promoting second chance hiring to give former inmates the opportunity to live crime-free lives and find meaningful employment. President Trump's DOJ and the Board of Prisons launched a new Ready to Work initiative to help connect employers directly with former prisoners. President Trump's historic tax cuts legislation included new Opportunity Zone initiatives to promote investment in low-income communities across the entire country. There's more. 8,764 communities across the country has been designated as Opportunity Zones. Opportunity Zones are expected to spur $100 billion in long-term private capital investment in economically distressed communities across the country. President Trump directed the Education Secretary to end Common Core education. President Trump signed the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund into law. President Trump signed measure funding prevention programs for veteran suicide. Companies have brought back over $1 trillion from overseas because of the TCJA bill that President Trump signed. Manufacturing jobs are growing at the fastest rate in more than 30 years. The stock market has reached record highs again and again. Median household income has hit highest level ever recorded. African American unemployment is at an all-time low. Hispanic American unemployment is at an all-time low. Asian American unemployment is at an all-time low. Women's unemployment rate is at 65-year low. Youth unemployment is at a 50-year low. We have the lowest unemployment rate ever recorded. The pledge to America's workers has resulted in employers committing to train more than 4 million Americans. 95% of U.S. manufacturers are optimistic about the future, the highest ever. As a result of the Republican tax bill, small businesses will have the lowest top marginal tax rate in more than 80 years. Record number of regulations eliminated that hurt small businesses. Signed welfare reform requiring able-bodied adults who don't have children to work or look for work if they're on welfare. Under President Trump, the FDA approved more affordable generic drugs than ever before in history. Shall we go on? Reformed Medicare program to stop hospitals from overcharging low-income seniors on their drugs, saving seniors hundreds of millions of dollars this year alone. Signed right to try legislation allowing terminally ill patients to try experimental treatment that wasn't allowed before. President Trump secured $6 billion in new funding to fight the opioid epidemic. President Trump signed VA Choice Act and a VA Accountability Act. It expanded VA telehealth services, walk-in clinics, and same-day urgent primary and mental health care. The United States oil production recently reached an all-time high, so we are less dependent on oil from the Middle East. The United States is a net natural gas exporter for the first time since 1957. NATO allies increased their defense spending because of his campaign. President Trump withdrew the United States from the job-killing Paris Climate Accord in 2017. And that same year, the United States still led the world by having the largest reduction in carbon emissions. Has his circuit court judge nominees being confirmed faster than any other new administration? President Trump had his Supreme Court Justices Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh confirmed. President Trump moved the United States Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. President Trump agreed to a new trade deal with Mexico and Canada that will increase jobs here and much, much money coming into the United States. President Trump reached a breakthrough agreement with the EU to increase United States exports. President Trump imposed tariffs on China in response to China's forced technology transfer, intellectual property theft, and their chronically abusive trade practices, has agreed to a Part 1 trade deal with China. President Trump signed legislation to improve the National Suicide Hotline. President Trump signed the most comprehensive childhood cancer legislation ever into law, which will advance childhood cancer research and improve treatments. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act signed into law by President Trump doubled the maximum amount of the child tax credit available to parents and lifted the income limits so more people could claim it. It also created a new tax credit for other dependents. In 2018, President Trump signed into law a $2.4 billion funding increase for the Child Care and Development Fund, providing a total of $8.1 billion to states to fund child care for low-income families. The Child and Dependent Care Tax Act, or the CDCTC, signed into law by President Trump, provides a tax credit equals to 20 to 35% of child care expenses, $3,000 per child and $6,000 per family, plus flexible spending accounts, or FSAs. What it does, it allows you to set aside up to $5,000 in pre-tax money to use for child care. In 2019, President Donald Trump signed the Autism Collaboration, Accountability, Research, Education, and Support Act, or the CARES, C-A-R-E-S, into law, which allocates $1.8 billion in funding over the next 5 years to help people with autism, spectrum disorder, and to help their families. In 2019, President Trump signed into law 2 funding packages providing nearly $19 million in new funding for lupus-specific research and education programs, as well as an additional $41.7 billion in funding for the National Institutes of Health, or the NIH, the most lupus funding ever. Another upcoming accomplishment to add: in the next week or two, President Trump will be signing the first major anti-robocall law. Aren't we tired of the robocalls? In decades. It's called the TRACED, T-R-A-C-E-D Act. Telephone Robocall Abuse Criminal Enforcement and Deterrence. Once it's the law, the TRACED Act will extend the period of time the FCC has to catch and punish those who intentionally break telemarketing restrictions. The bill also requires voice service providers to develop a framework to verify calls that they're legitimate before they reach your phone. The U.S. stock market continually hits an all-time record highs. It was happening before the COVID-19, and even after the COVID-19, the U.S. stock market still hit record highs. Because so many people asked for a document with all of this listed in one place, well, here it is. No links provided to remove bias, as Google search is easy. Would you please take the time to share this, print this out for your family, your friends, your neighbors? I encourage you to drop this list off to voters before the 2020 election, too. And one more thing. Our President Donald J. Trump, he did all of this. He made all of these accomplishments while fighting the flagrant abuse and impeachment charges from the Democratic Socialist Party. Well, there you have it. You have just heard the many accomplishments that our President Trump has done for America. The false, fake news media will never show his accomplishments. We are standing now at a crossroad. And when we look at what is happening and this election, it is good versus evil. That's where we are. We're right at a crossroad of the life of America versus the death of America. And it's going to be up to the patriots, the citizens of the United States who really love America and love our President, Donald J. Trump. He has done more for us than any president has ever done. Even in the midst of the impeachment and the attack day by day by day. And now we can see upon the sanctuary cities how much evil, how much murder and death, the defunding of law enforcement. That's not what we are. That's not who we are. We are the home of the brave and the land of the free. And the only way that we're going to keep our freedoms in America is that we vote for Donald J. Trump as our next president. We must stand against these socialists, Marxists, and communism and not allow it to take over our country. And the only way we're going to stop it is at the voting booth on November 3rd. So I urge you to please share this video. Talk about it. Share it in your church. Share it with your family. Please share it, share it, share it. People need to know what our president has done. We have to do whatever we can to make sure that we keep America great again by voting. So please share the video. Thank you. Vote Trump 2020. Keep America great.